very first time that I stood up here 18 years ago and I looked out, I thought, uh-oh. And the uh-oh, it was not about insecurity about being up here or nervousness. The uh-oh was about what I could see. Now, my entire life at services, I had sat in the pews. And as I stood up here on the bimah, I could not believe what I saw. Now, what did I see? Everything. And I mean everything. When a person in the back of the room, I can see you, would lean over and whisper in each other's ears, I could see it. When there was a person who would yawn, I could see it. The rabbi could see everything. I had no idea this was the best seat in the entire house. And my uh-oh was like my childhood service life flashing before my eyes. Confession, as a kid, I was not exactly engaged in services. My oldest sister, Rachel, and I, we would keep each other entertained by playing a form of tennis, by cracking our knuckles. I would serve by cracking one finger. She would respond with cracking another finger. We would then go back and forth until finally the person who had no knuckles left to crack would lose the match. And then, of course, the deeper we went into the match, the more we would start to giggle, having no idea that anybody actually could see us. Now, if it's not clear enough, I didn't like services. But I loved Judaism. And it was not like I was admiring it from afar, thinking, you know something? I'm going to be on Team Jewish, as if that was even an option. I was Jewish. I was very Jewish. When I went to Israel when I was 16 years old for my confirmation trip and I got off the plane, I literally kissed the tarmac. When I got to Israel, I had come home. I told my parents at the end of the summer that I was going to join the Israeli army, because those were my people. When I went to the Western Wall, it was spiritual. I wouldn't call it religious. It was spiritual. As my hands, as they embraced the stone, I noticed that it was smooth from the thousands of years of Jews that had come before me, working their fingers into those same crevices on the wall as I did. My fingers were intertwined with my ancestors. When I began to wear a Star of David necklace, and my secular non-Jewish friends would ask me why, I would tell them I wasn't religious. And they would challenge me, how could you not be religious? You go to synagogue all the time. You have Shabbat at your house every Friday night. I mean, your mom is the president of the synagogue. I'd say, yeah, I know, but I'm not religious. Judaism, it's different. And then over the years, my answer, it would vary from I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. For a while, ethnicity was the reason why I connected with other Jews in a different way. When I saw someone Orthodox with a yarmulke on, I had to make sure that they knew I was Jewish too. For a bit, I was a cultural Jew, with my father bringing home Zabars from his trips to New York and sitting me down saying, son, this is your culture. This is your heritage. As I would look at the grossest pickled herring I could imagine. Honestly, I always felt more like a burrito Jew and less like a pickled herring Jew. But I was a Jew, and Jews were absolutely my people. And as I got older and I studied to become a rabbi, people would assume that I was religious. But if I'm being honest with you, that word religious had never felt totally comfortable. There was always something, it just didn't feel right. I mean, what exactly was I? A non-religious, cultural, ethnic, peoplehood, deeply spiritual, practicing rabbi? But the comforting or the strange thing was that even as complex and as messy as these categories were, I felt right inside the Jewish milieu. Last night, when Rabbi Singer posed the statement, he said, I'm Jewish, but I'm not, And 1,000 of you said religious. Judaism and our connections to it are a complicated mess because Judaism is different. Now, how did we get here? We are one community. Why so many opinions? I reached out to my friend and teacher, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, and I told him that I was thinking about talking about how the thing that I hear the most from people is, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And then without a beat, Dr. Hoffman said, of course people are spiritual and not religious, because Judaism was never a religion. I said, what? What do you mean Judaism was never a religion? He responded, Judaism was never a religion. I mean, until it was a religion. It really wasn't until Napoleon kind of forced it on us, said Hoffman. Quick history lesson. In 1806, Napoleon assembled 112 Jewish notables in Paris to figure out who were these Jews. Were they a nation inside Napoleon's nation? Now, if that was the case, there was going to be a real problem. So, this group of 112 notables writes, quote, resolved by the French deputies professing the religion of Moses. We no longer form a nation within a nation. And just like that, we were a religion. So, if you feel a little bit uneasy about the term religious, you get a pass. Because honestly, it's only been 217 years since we've even been a religion. Now, here's the second and the even bigger challenge, is that since its inception, Judaism did not fit into the standard definition of religion. Because at that point in time, religion was understood as a belief system. Now, this is in contrast to Judaism, which was founded on a behavior-based system through law known as halacha. It's why a person who says, I'm a bad Jew, I don't believe in God, it's wrong. That's not how we ever categorized or even kicked people out of the fold. It was all done based on behavior, not belief. Now, if you do not live a life that is filled with Jewish behaviors, and your behaviors are antithetical to Judaism, then yeah, you might be moving closer to that category of bad Jew. Much of the Talmud is about business law and how we behave in this world, because this is the world that we know. Bernie Madoff, bad Jew. Even though he sat on the Orthodox Rabbinical School's Yeshiva University Board of Directors. So my first group of Jews who maybe don't feel religious or maybe a little bit uncomfortable with that term, that's why. We actually don't even have a word in Hebrew for religious. And for you modern Hebrew speakers here, and you're thinking, Rega, ma kohe? What about the word dati? Dati, it's correct. That's the modern Hebrew word we use for religious. And for you linguists out there, and you want to know, where does that come from? You have to look all the way back to the book of Esther, where it means decree or law. And you also can find it in Deuteronomy, where it talks about the fiery law of God, which you can see is a direct corollary with halacha, Jewish law. So, our word for religious is actually coming from law, not belief. So when we hear the word religious and we translate it in our head as belief, that's not Jewish. Religious is the behavior set that we follow. Now, to be clear, this is just the Jews in the West that thought that this was a religion, because what Napoleon did, it never actually got to the East. Those Eastern European Jews had no idea that they were a religion. Now, we've talked before about the fact that we are an ever-evolving people who take influences from all around us. Those pews that you sit in, that organ behind me, we got those from the American Protestants. The classical music, we got that from when we were in Germany. Even our mystical tradition of Kabbalah, it's often thought to be directly influenced by the Sufis in Islam. So yeah, those Eastern European Jews were no different. Nationalism was taking off in that area, and they saw themselves as a nation. But more accurately, they saw themselves as a people without a nation. Now, we'd always been a people. That's why we always called ourselves the people of Israel, way before we called ourselves the Jews. The influence of nationalism is where Zionism came from, to build a nation for our people of Poland, our people of France, our people of China, of Ethiopia, of Morocco, of Yemen. It was not about race. It was not about an ethnicity. It was about our people. But for those that came to America, maybe some of us here, it was a little bit more complicated. As Hoffman says, we were left only with ethnicity, nationalism, without the nation, which is to say an a people. Okay, enough of the history lesson. But it's critical to understand who we are as a people and why we can appear so messy. Because we are a religion, but of a profoundly different flavor. So what does this look like for us at Congregation Emanu-El in the 21st century? I pulled up the address on my phone and I punched it into Waze, and I drove to their house. I hadn't seen them since their parent died, and this was the first night of Shiva. I pulled up, I grabbed my bag of Shiva books, I walked up the stairs and I let myself in without knocking because the door was ajar, as it was supposed to be, to let other people in. And the house, it had the same feel as many Shiva homes. It was not as loud as a party, but definitely not quiet. And as always, I found everyone gathered in the kitchen, small talking, grabbing food, always eating lox and bagels for dinner, because I guess that's our people's food. Some of the conversations I could hear were about what people had done in the summer. Others were talking about sports. But as we moved into the living room and we passed out the books for the short Mariv service, it got quieter. Now, some people, they knew the prayers, the Baruch, the Shema, and so on. There were non-Jews who would sit off in the corner quietly as we made our way through the service. And at the end of the Amidah, before we said the Kaddish, everyone, they closed their books and they listened to their friend, to their sibling, to their parent, talk about their own parent who had just died. In the room, it was silent, hanging on the words as memories were painted about fond stories of their childhood, on how when they were picked up from Sunday school at Emanu-El, their parent would always take them to the candy store and would tell them about when they were a kid at Emanu-El, they would sneak out on Sundays to go to 2nd Avenue Grocery to get their own candy. They talked about the lessons that were taught. And I looked around the room, and at first, I'd only noticed the speaker crying as they spoke. But then I noticed those tears were contagious, and others in the room were crying too. Now, I didn't know if those others were crying because they were thinking of their own parents, or maybe they knew the person who had died, or if they felt the pain and the loss of their friend who was sharing. And my guess is that it was a little bit of all of it. The service was built to create an opening for this conversation to happen, not alone, but among the community. No one was bored or whispering in each other's ears because it was deep, it was real, it was authentic. That is spirituality. That is Judaism. And as we wrapped up the service and people got back to eating, the din of people talking got louder and louder. And the services, they were just the scaffolding to reveal the depth that exists within us. And without it, most of the time, we just sit on the surface, like a water skier talking about summer vacations or sports. Judaism reveals spirituality. There's a reason why so many Jews say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Now, I do know some of you are just sitting there shaking their head at me saying, I'm neither category. I'm not spiritual and I'm not religious. First off, I appreciate that you came today. Second, I appreciate that you paid your membership dues. But I don't buy it. So when I say spiritual, I actually think 99.99% of the planet is spiritual. Let me define. Spiritual is knowing in your kishkis that there is meaning outside of the corporeal nature of how we exist. If you think this is all just meaningless and we are just a bunch of electrons, then no tears should be shed when someone you know dies. Because honestly, what's the big deal? The electrons haven't gone anywhere. The universe is a closed system, and electrons don't die because they are fundamental particles. But humans all over the world have burial practices and mourn, and they feel pain because we know we're more than a body. A water skeeter, it may sit on the surface, but Judaism, it aims to dive to the depths in all that we do, spiritually, intellectually, and behaviorally. In our understanding of time, of consciousness, of business, ethics, love, relationships, how we're born, how we live, and ultimately, how we die. And it's not a set prescribed doctrine, but thousands upon thousands of years of trying to reveal depth. Hoffman calls this a conversation. Everything that we do in Judaism is a conversation. Our religion is a conversation. The Talmud is thousands upon thousands of pages of rabbis arguing and disagreeing in conversation, all for the purpose of trying to figure out and how to squeeze the sacredness out of every moment that we are here, in every service that we go to, in every class that we learn at, in every business transaction that we make, to make sure that it is founded in truth and ethics. Talking about Zabars and naming it as a part of my story is a part of the conversation. It tells the story about my family being immigrants in New York after fleeing Austria in World War II. It's not just pickled herring. It's part of the story. It's part of the conversation. This sermon, it's not meant to be a lecture. It's meant to be a dialogue. I'm hoping to spur a conversation. I'm hoping that when you leave here, you'll talk, you'll criticize me, you'll disagree with what I say, because that starts a conversation. Our conversation, it's not just meant to be within these walls. We are meant to be open to the entire San Francisco Jewish community. And this is not just a conversation among Jews. The number of non-Jews in this room and online are significant and a deeply important part of the conversation. Without our constant interaction with non-Jews, much of Judaism as we know it today would not exist. Kabbalah probably would not exist without our Muslim brothers. And the worship we do, it would not exist without our time in Germany and in America. Judaism, it's not a spectator sport. The reason why I was playing the US Open version of Crack My Knuckles with my sister was because I was not engaging with the questions that Judaism was asking me. Judaism is a religion defined by laws that provide the scaffolding to challenge us to go deeper in life from a spiritual and an emotional perspective, yes, and also from an intellectual perspective. At a mitzvah, the parents and those that have helped raise and filled this child, we weep. We weep because we remember those sleepless nights when our kids were infants, when they were so small they couldn't hold up their heads, when they were eating every 2 hours. We would stand over the cribs, quietly making sure that they were still breathing, nurturing their lower bodies, just hoping and wishing to see what their souls would be. And now at 13, we weep. Because the ritual, it's a pause button for us to see them, to not only stand in front of the community, but also to remember those sleepless nights. And then just in a blink. And we don't want to just hear them chant the Torah. We want them to share their voice, their perspective, their soul. That's the emotional. That's the spiritual. Our bat mitzvah student has been asked to tell us how she sees the world. And not in a vacuum, but in a conversation with the thousands of years of Jewish texts that came before her. She stands right here. And she tells us why the rabbis that came before her were wrong and why some of them were right. And she's intellectually challenged not only to begin to find her voice, but to share her voice and to add to the conversation. Because what we're celebrating are those eyes. A set of eyes that have never existed in the history of the world. And Judaism knows that. And it builds a framework for parents to weep and teenagers to share their voice. Until, before she knows it, she's going to be sitting right there in the front row, weeping over her own child. Her child she took to get candy every Sunday. And then in another blink, she'll be watching her grandchild. And as she watches her grandchild, there's a joy and a pride inside of her. Because something ancient and relevant has been handed down to care for her children, her grandchildren, the generations that she may never meet, so that when she's gone, when she's no longer alive, she knows that even though she will be gone, they will not be alone, but in a home where bagels are served at dinner. Before they gather in the living room and have the comfort of their community to hold them and to hear them as they share stories of her. And they reminisce about her taking them to get candy every Sunday after YFE. Now, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't have kids, how do I relate to this? You are absolutely a part of the story by being here and engaged in this conversation. Judaism is the framework that holds us, that opens us, that challenges us, that heals us. For those that have children and for those who don't have children, being a part of the conversation, it links us to a tradition which has been whispered to each generation for as long back as we can't even remember. As Rabbi Beth said, that is l'ador of adoring. So whether you're a cultural Jew, an ethnic Jew, a religious Jew, a peoplehood Jew, a pickled herring Jew, or a burrito Jew, a non-Jew who's engaged with Judaism, whether you're from Jerusalem or France or Poland or Yemen or New York or San Francisco, we as Jews are a behavior-based religion who are constantly evolving because conversations evolve. The gift that we give to ourselves, the gift that we give to our children, the gift we give to those generations that will know none of our names is to use the scaffolding, to be an active voice as we build and nurture this ancient, young religion.